What's up, guys? We're on a streak of, I think, 5 straight winning days now. It's been good. 3-1 yesterday, 2-0 in college basketball. Georgetown, looked like Georgetown might be able to actually take that game outright. They were losing, but within the number almost the whole game. Then they had a lead by, I think, 3 with very little time left, and they just kind of blew it right near the end. That was with a few minutes left, and they just blew it near the end. They had one play where they were down 1 and they obviously had possession, had a chance to take the lead again, and they turned the ball over, allowed like a fast break, and committed a foul on a layup, which was an and one. So that kind of pretty much just put the game out of reach. I was worried they wouldn't even cover once that happened, but they still were able to cover, so that's good. Texas played a tough game, and they were winning outright for a lot of that game. Lost the lead, looked like they were probably going to cover and lose when it got down to the end of it, but they were able to win, I think, right at the end. I didn't see the actual shot at the end, but I think they won on a shot like pretty much right at the buzzer there. Potential, I think it might have been a buzzer beater there for Texas. So that was good. That was awesome. NHL, the one loss was Ottawa. I think they did get outplayed, but they never trailed in the game until like late into the third period, I think. Like that final score does not indicate what actually happened in that game. They had not trailed until they were down 4-3 in the third period. And I think they probably wound up giving up an empty netter or something. I haven't looked, but the final score, 6-3, doesn't indicate what was actually going on. They were winning 3-2 late in the second period, and it was a 3-3 tie for a while. And then they were down 4-3 very late in the game. So there was that one, and then Arizona was able to get there after they didn't hold the lead, even though I think they actually outplayed the Bruins a little bit. And when you have games like this that are that close the whole way, and that team is right on the verge of winning the game as an underdog, I think you kind of know you made the right play. You have the right side as the underdog there when they're like right on the cusp of winning, and you got them at plus money. That's a good sign. Arizona, I was worried they were both going to fall short, but I wanted at least one of the two to get there to have a good night. And that's what I think. If they both lost, I still would have won money on the day because of the Texas outright money line cash and because of the money line hockey underdogs that I play. I put a little bit less on them to win the same amount. So, but Arizona was able to get there. They were losing by 1 goal a couple of different times during the game. Didn't actually have the lead until they took the lead in the third period, and then they gave that up. Unfortunately, I have a bet against my Bruins, so it's like I don't want either of these teams to lose really, but one has to, and Arizona was able to do it in overtime. So we got there. Looking at today, I'm being quite selective here. I'm going to have no plays in NHL. I think the closest that I would be to playing anything would be Philadelphia Flyers. Montreal is 57% of the tickets on them, but 52% of the cash over on the Philadelphia side. But Philadelphia is up from minus 162 to minus 173. So they're kind of in that no man's land where you'd have to lay like the money line pretty much. And it's kind of a little bit of a big money line that I don't quite want to really do, but I don't know if it'll get like even higher, and you might be able to lay like a puck line on it, which I'm not sure I would want to do that either. But Montreal is in the worst of the two spots here out of these two teams. They beat the Rangers in overtime in a shootout, actually, but they've had 3 days off since then. That was their previous game. They could be in a letdown spot. And I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing that they've just been sitting around after that win. It's a huge win over the Rangers for Montreal. So, but will they be totally unfocused on a Philadelphia team who's been playing pretty well as well? I'm not so sure about that. Philadelphia, they are in a better bounce back spot. They've had they've only had 1 day off. They've just been sitting at home, though, but they lost pretty badly to Pittsburgh in their last game. So I think they're in a spot where they might want to bounce back and turn it on. And Montreal's in a letdown spot, but Montreal has the way better rest spot. So that's what's going on there. And then Dallas, Minnesota, there is kind of a zigzag type of situation here. Dallas is down from minus 195 to minus 187 on the money line, but 94% of the cash on them and 57% of the tickets. So it looks like they have a pretty big cash discrepancy on them, even though the line is indicating otherwise. The line's moving down on them. There isn't much that I have to say about this other than the fact that it is a zigzag where in their previous game, Dallas went into Minnesota and beat them 4-0. So I think the deal here would be that Minnesota would be the team that has the adjustments to make here. So I would only lean to the side of the Wild here, but I'm just not going to quite get involved. I don't think the zigzag is quite strong enough for me to do it, but that's the way I would lean there. And Dallas has Nashville next, who is the closest team behind them in the division right now, although they're 6 points behind them, so it's not really that close. But they might consider that Nashville game to be a little bit bigger, especially when Nashville just beat them on their own ice. So that's the way I would look there. I would be to the Minnesota Wild, and then Vegas, Colorado. I just think it's probably going to be a pretty good game. Colorado's coming off a big win that went into overtime against the Bruins, and I think Vegas has had more rest than they have, so it's possible Vegas might be the way to look there, even though the cash discrepancy is way on Colorado. Mine up from minus 140 to minus 144, 89% of the cash, 71% of the tickets on Vegas. So I don't want to really buck what I'm seeing there, at least. I don't want to buck any of these cash discrepancies, really. So the market seems to be in agreement with me on Philadelphia out of those three, at least. But I'm just not getting involved in any of that. In the NBA, this is like a total minefield in the NBA. I just don't want much involvement in anything here. Although the closest that I would be to playing anything here would probably be to the Boston Celtics, even though I think it's a big game for both teams. Minnesota T-Wolves coming in. The Celtics are up from 6.5 to 7. There might still be 6.5 out there. Try to get the 6.5 if you do want to play the Celtics. They have 97% of the cash, but 92% of the tickets. So they are public, even though it looks like they have the cash discrepancy and the numbers moving up on them. The rest spot for Minnesota is really not good in that game. So even though, you figure they'll probably pay attention because it is the Celtics. They're not just going to overlook the Celtics, but they're playing a back-to-back. They're playing a third game in 4 nights, a fourth game in 6, a fifth game in 8, and it is actually a 6th game in 10 days, all in different cities. Going back to, they went to New York, and then they played at home against New Orleans, then started a road trip that went to Houston, Dallas, Orlando, and now up to Boston with no rest. So the schedule makers, man, they're helping out the Celtics here quite a bit by giving Minnesota such an awful rest spot. It's one of the worst rest spots that I've seen a team in this year. So there's no way that I would be on the Minnesota T-Wolves here. And the Celtics have had 1 day off. They're returning home, but it's only from a road trip to Indiana for 2 games where they beat Indiana in the first game, then they lost in the second game. So the Celtics might be in a bit of a bounce-back spot here. And maybe they have a little bit of revenge on their mind. I don't know, because Minnesota did beat them the one time they played them this year, way back in November in Minnesota. But the Celtics do have Milwaukee up next. Still, I don't think they're going to overlook a Minnesota team when the Celtics are coming off a loss to Indiana and they have Milwaukee. I mean, despite the fact they have Milwaukee up next, coming off a loss to Indiana, and the fact that it is Minnesota, who's a good team. So those are my thoughts on that. And then I guess the other one I was looking at potentially playing, Utah Jazz they're definitely in a spot where you'd want to go against them. They're in a letdown and returning home from a road trip. So they had a 3-game road trip. They went out to Boston and got wrecked, but then they went to Philadelphia and won. And I don't know if Philadelphia had like some of those injuries going on in that game or not. They've had a couple of injuries, most notably to Embiid, but Embiid might have played in that one. I don't know, but still, Utah went in and beat Philly by double digits, and then they beat Milwaukee by double digits in the next game. And that was over. That was a 3-game trip over a span of 4 days, I believe. So that's just kind of a brutal stretch. And now they're coming home with only 1 day off. So they're playing a 4th game in 6 days, all in different cities. So really tough spot for Utah, and in a letdown off of wins over Philadelphia and Milwaukee. But it's Denver coming into their house. So are they really going to overlook Denver? I don't think you're going to overlook Denver. Nobody's really going to overlook them. When you're Utah, especially, I don't think you will. Denver's had multiple days off, and they just beat Detroit. So it's like, who cares? So, I mean, Denver, they're in the better spot. Utah's in a really bad spot, and Denver is not at all. Denver has more rest, and they don't really have that much to focus on the horizon, really. So I think they might actually pay attention to this game. So I do lean to the Nuggets in that one, but I just don't really want to be laying points on the road with a team that everybody knows is the better team. You're not going to find that much value in doing so. Nuggets sitting at 7, and they have 83% of the tickets and 70% of the cash. So it looks like the cash discrepancy is against it, but there is no way I would want to be on the Utah Jazz in that spot at all, really, with what they've done recently and with having less rest. That's a rough spot for Utah. And then I think, I might have some opinions on other games. I mean, if you guys want to ask me about them, but like NBA, it's a decent slate there with the NBA. there's nothing that I really see that really appeals to me. And we'll move to college basketball, which is a really big slate. I don't know if I want to comment on all of these games, but there are a lot of games that are interesting that are like I'm close to wanting to be on it. I lean to Penn State playing against Northwestern. Northwestern sitting at 1.5. I don't know what KenPom has this as. What does KenPom have this at? Probably somewhere in the vicinity of where that number is. He has them at he has Northwestern 2. Northwestern definitely the better team, but looks like kind of a suspicious line because Northwestern has the better record. Sitting at 1.5. They're coming off a game where they just beat Michigan State. Pretty big win there, bouncing back from a horrible-looking loss to Illinois. They're going to Penn State, and then they have Wisconsin up next in 3 days, who's a ranked team on the road, one of the better teams in the conference as well. So Northwestern, it does look a bit sandwichy, although I don't know. Are they really going to be like really high on themselves after beating Michigan State, even though that's a big win? Michigan State is really good. I think Michigan State's very underrated right now, but Michigan State's had a really tough schedule, but their record doesn't look very good right now, so I don't know. And is Northwestern still going to pay attention to Penn State because Penn State won the conference last year, and it might be a spot where it's possible that Northwestern doesn't actually overlook them totally. But I do lean to Penn State because I think the game is still kind of sandwichy and surrounded by bigger games from Northwestern. I'm just not quite sure I can get there. And Penn State, they're coming off a win over Michigan, which is still kind of a decent win for them. And they have Purdue up in 3 days. So I don't know, man. So it's not really a spot where I'd want to necessarily be all on Penn State either. So I don't know. Might just stay away from that one. Michigan is definitely down this year. They're in last place in the conference, but still, you beat Michigan. I mean, it's a big name team. I think that feels pretty good beating Michigan, and when you have Purdue up next. But it's still, I don't think you're going to overlook Northwestern, who's been playing well and has a really good record either. So I don't know. It seems to me like both of these teams might kind of show up in this one. So it's not one that I'm going to quite get involved in with all these kind of conflicting scenarios there. But one thing that I do like for the side of Penn State is that Penn State, before the Michigan game, they got crushed by Michigan State. They lost by 31 at Michigan State. People are going to look at that and look at these records and think this is way easy to take Northwestern here because Northwestern just beat Michigan State by double digits, and Michigan State crushed Penn State by 30-something. So you're giving me a price where it's just playing Northwestern to win the game? That looks so easy. Yeah. It does definitely look too easy. I'm just not sure I can quite get there with it. I'm saving I'm not going to blow my whole wad. I'm saving it for what I think are the best situations on the entire board, although, of course, nothing is guaranteed at all. And some of these like leans that I have might win, whereas my actual plays might not, and that would suck. But Tennessee at Mississippi State looks sus as well. Tennessee, 5th-ranked team in the country, and I believe it's deserved. I think they are one of the top 5 teams. They're like right around like 5th in the country. I think they're up from 1.5 to 2 as a road favorite, so it's still kind of like pick the winner. Looks a bit easy to take Tennessee there, and Tennessee's off a blowout win over Ole Miss, which people are going to look at that. I don't know if people are going to even remember that Ole Miss was ranked or not, but they'll see that Ole Miss does only have 1 loss, and it is that one. But Ole Miss, very overrated. I'm just not sure if the public understands that they are. They have not faced anybody until they ran into Tennessee, and Tennessee just totally smacked them down. So I don't know. Is Tennessee going to be high and mighty on themselves for beating Ole Miss? I'm not so sure about that, even though they're an undefeated team. I don't know if they're going to consider that to be that gigantic of a win, and they won so easily in that game. I don't know. They don't really have anything on the horizon either, even though Georgia's been playing fairly well as well and is tied with them in the conference standings right now. I don't know. Mississippi State doesn't have a bad record either, so I don't know if Tennessee's really going to overlook a Mississippi State team that's been playing pretty well as well. I'm not sure. Mississippi State is off a loss, off of a South Carolina loss, where maybe Mississippi State was looking ahead to this Tennessee game, and they have Alabama and Kentucky up next. So 3 tough games in a row there. So is that South Carolina loss going to be a momentum stopper, or was it a game where they were just looking ahead a bit? I don't know. South Carolina kind of sneaky as well. They've been playing fairly well as well. So that's actually kind of a sneaky, like tough game that Mississippi State is off of because South Carolina's been playing pretty well. So I don't quite want to get there on Mississippi State either because I think they're coming off a tough game as well. Tennessee has also owned them and hasn't lost them in like 4 years or something, although some of those teams have been a bit different. But even last year, Tennessee owned them with when the teams were more similar. So, and KenPom, I think, has this line at somewhere in the vicinity of 2. So right kind of in line where the number is. I do lean to Mississippi State there. Mississippi State's definitely underrated. Tennessee is about rated where they should be pretty much. But I just can't quite get there in a spot like that. Clemson is up from 1-2 at Virginia Tech, where Clemson's coming off a pretty tough game and loss to North Carolina, where they played pretty tough, and they lost to Miami before that. So kind of a tough game now, having to go on the road to Virginia Tech. So I do lean to Virginia Tech in that one a bit, and I think Clemson maybe still even a little bit overrated where they are right now, but maybe not quite, although Virginia Tech just lost to Florida State, which I don't know if that's an embarrassing loss. Florida State's been playing okay recently, so I don't know. I do lean to Virginia Tech there, but there's just not enough of the situation for me to quite get me there on that. Although I think Clemson is kind of in a hangover spot there. Ken Palm only has them winning this game by 1, so the lean would be to Virginia Tech there. I lean against Belmont. This one was close to a play for me. Belmont is coming off a pretty big win. They crushed Drake on their own floor, and I think Drake was looking ahead to their big game against Indiana State today, where I would actually lean to Drake in that one because Drake lost really badly to Belmont in their last game, and Indiana State won again at Northern Illinois. So Indiana State hasn't really done anything wrong, and they are the better team, but Drake is at home there and coming off a really ugly loss, up from 1-2 now. I don't think if the public is going to look at this, I don't think they're going to want anything to do with Drake off of how bad they looked against Belmont. But Drake is a good team. They're almost as good as Indiana State. I would say fairly close there as the line is telling you there. Indiana State's only a somewhat better team there. Lean would be to Drake, but a stronger lean would be to Illinois State. But Belmont's down from 7-6, and I think Ken Palm has this at 8. So I'd kind of just stay away from that one too. Illinois State's coming off kind of a tough game, I think, against Southern Illinois maybe. So I just have to kind of I stay off of all these games, even though I do have leans. Like, there's no way I would want to be on Belmont with what they just did to Drake, that total destruction of Drake. And Illinois State just lost at Drake really badly, but they were coming off a game against Kentucky. So I don't know, and Drake's good, but Drake just crushed Illinois State. So the syllogistic bettors are going to look at that and say Drake killed Illinois State and Belmont killed Drake. So Belmont will kill Illinois State here. Yeah, I tend to think otherwise, but the Southern Illinois game was fairly tough. So Illinois State kind of playing a stretch of tough games in a row here. Kentucky, Drake, Southern Illinois, and then Belmont all in a row. So I can't quite get involved there in Illinois State. And Ken Palm has the line at 8, whereas the line's currently sitting at 6. So I just don't want to do it, but Belmont's coming off such a big win that don't want to get involved there. North Carolina at NC State looks a bit sus as well, with North Carolina 4.5 or something. NC State, they always step it up against North Carolina, but North Carolina is really good. Ken Palm has this at 5. I think the number's at 4.5 right now. So I'm just going to stay off of that one too. It'll be an interesting game for sure with NC State there. Actually, it's down to 3.5 now. So I would tend to want to stay away from that. And Wisconsin, Ohio State's sitting at 1.5, down from 2 as a favorite at home against a ranked Wisconsin team, which that also looks suspicious. But there's just not enough to get me involved there with the situation. There isn't that much of a situation there with Wisconsin. They don't have that much coming off of or that they're looking forward to, even though they just beat Nebraska, who did just beat Purdue. But even so, and Ohio State, they're coming off an ugly loss, like kind of an ugly loss against Indiana, even though Indiana still has the name. Their record's not bad, but Indiana's not very good this year. So I don't know. They might be in a bounce back spot. That was also only their second road game, and Ohio State has not been good on the road so far this year. Wisconsin is definitely the better team, but how much better of the team are they? I don't know. Ken Palm has Wisconsin by 1 in this one. The line with Ohio State being a favorite, that's tough. UConn Xavier. UConn's up from 4-5. Also kind of looks a little bit sus there. That one, again, there's not really much of the situation that I can really get involved in there with UConn there. Xavier, kind of sneaky, not a bad team here. UConn coming off a win over Butler that was kind of close. Not really something I want to get involved in there. Xavier is off a loss to Villanova. But Ken Palm's got this at 4, so it is kind of right where the number is. That's tough. Let's see what else we got. Western Kentucky, I think, is kind of in a letdown spot off of what they just did. What did they just do? They beat Liberty. That was kind of a big win for Western Kentucky over Liberty. Liberty, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the record's pretty good, so they're probably one of the better teams in that conference. And now they're going on the road to Sam Houston, kind of going to be a tough spot there for Western Kentucky. Sam Houston did just beat Louisiana Tech, who I think is okay this year, so that one's tough. There isn't that much of the situation there, other than I think Western Kentucky in a bit of a letdown. But are they going to totally overlook Sam Houston? I don't know. Sam Houston's up from 1-2. Line's telling you that Western Kentucky is a little bit of the better team. KenPom only has that at 1. I'll stay off that too. Florida, I think, is in a bad spot against Ole Miss. They're up from 1 to 2.5 now, so the line is moving on Florida. Florida, we just saw, man, they had that game in their grasp. They could have beaten Kentucky at home. That would have been a big win for Florida, and they fell just short. I don't like Florida off that loss, man. They're in a letdown spot coming off that, but will they be focused on an Ole Miss team that's been playing well that only has 1 loss on the season? Maybe, which is why I don't want to totally count Florida out. That and the fact that Mississippi is just very overrated, even still. Florida is definitely the better team, the much better team. KenPom has this line at 2, though, so I don't know. It's kind of tough. Like, I would only lean to Mississippi there. Mississippi is off a really ugly loss, but it was to Tennessee, and I don't know if that's going to be – when you lose that, like, undefeated status and it's, like, a game that you get, like, emotionally high for, sometimes that tends to, like, hang you over a little bit, and that might be the case with Mississippi there. So I don't quite want to get there with Mississippi either, but Florida is in a letdown spot coming off or hangover spot coming off that really tough game against Kentucky. So I think Florida is in the worst of the 2 spots, but I still think people think that Mississippi is a bit better than they actually are, too. And I don't know if that Tennessee loss is going to hang them over. And then TCU, finally, I'll mention this one. I'm not actually going to play this game, but TCU's up from 3.5 to 4. That looks way suspect because Oklahoma is the 9th-ranked team in the country. And I think Oklahoma, they're overrated by a bit. I think they're probably around like maybe the 20th best team. And TCU, probably somewhere like in the 30s, maybe I would say. So this is closer than it looks. And KenPom only has this line at TCU 1. So I do like that aspect of it. The power ratings guys are telling you that this line is way too high on TCU. Why do the books bring it out this way when you know they're going to get tons of money on Oklahoma? I'm not quite sure, especially when I think Oklahoma is actually in the somewhat better spot here. TCU's in a terrible spot. They just went into Allen Fieldhouse in Kansas and almost upset Kansas in Kansas. TCU was so close to doing that, and they got screwed out of the win by the refs on a flop by Dickinson, who's now on Kansas. He's the Michigan transfer. He's known for being a very dirty player. He was in those scuffles when he was on Michigan, had that play where he punched Caleb Love on UNC in the face, I think he punched him in the face when he was down on the ground, and then he tried to knee him in the head as well. Dickinson, hate that guy, total dirty player, and he massively flopped in that Kansas game. And not only did they call that a foul, the refs called it a flagrant foul. The only thing that was flagrant was what the refs were doing there, obviously helping Kansas win that game. TCU is probably going to be in a hangover spot after that, man. But will they be totally unfocused when they're facing the 9th-ranked team in the country now? Probably not. But the question is, how do you get back up after that? The way that Kansas game ended, man, when you could have won that game, you gave it your all. It's going to be real tough. And it's almost like a sandwich spot because Houston is up next for TCU, which is another huge game. They're sandwiched in between 2 teams that at the time were ranked 2 in the country. So it's going to be tough, man. But then Oklahoma, they're coming off a decent win over Iowa State, too, but Iowa State was unranked. They do have Kansas up next, so I don't know. Is it a bit of a look ahead? Maybe. It's a little bit of a look ahead. It just keeps me off it a little bit because the line just looks too suspicious, but TCU is really in a bad spot here. So I would be close to taking the points with Oklahoma here. It's close to a play for me on Oklahoma. And then the actual plays that I'm on, I think are the best situations to go against here. Number 1, I'm getting involved in the Horizon League here, and I'm fading Wright State. They're down from 6 to 5.5 now. I think I got Robert Morris plus 5.5 on this one, and KenPom I think only has this at 3. So people not giving Robert Morris much credit. Robert Morris is definitely a bad team, but Wright State isn't that good either. Maybe Wright State's being a bit overvalued. I don't know, but Wright State, They're coming off a huge win where they scored 106 points against IPFW, who's like the top team in the Horizon. That's a huge win for Wright State, man. And they beat Cleveland State before that. A couple of big games there. And they're putting up huge point totals. If the public looks at this, they're going to say Wright State just put up over 100 points and they beat the top team in the Horizon, IPFW. Huge win there. They're going to want nothing to do with Robert Morris. Of course, Wright State's going to blow out Robert Morris, right? I'm not so sure about that. And Wright State has Youngstown State up next too, who's one of the other best teams in the conference, probably second best to IPFW. So that's kind of a big game too there. So this is a sandwich and a letdown for Wright State. They just beat the top team in the conference, IPFW. They have the second best team in the conference coming up next in Youngstown State, and it's going to Robert Morris into Pittsburgh, where Robert Morris, I don't think they've been in the Horizon for that long, so I think it's maybe still a little bit of an unfamiliar type of venue for them. Robert Morris, they just blew out IUPUI, who IUPUI and Detroit Mercy are the two worst teams in this conference, and I think there's a big gap there before you get to those two, but people are going to look at these teams and think Robert Morris is like almost as bad as IUPUI because their records are about the same, but Robert Morris is definitely better than IUPUI, but they did just absolutely embarrass IUPUI. Coming off a blowout win like that, not necessarily something I want to be on with a team like with Robert Morris having done that, but I think nobody really cares, and I think that functions as kind of a tune-up game for Robert Morris after they had 3 straight losses. So I think that actually is a momentum starter. I think that helps. So even though they have IPFW next, you're Robert Morris. I don't think you're going to overlook anybody. And Wright State is ahead of you in the conference standings right now. I don't think you're going to overlook Wright State. I think you'll be focused especially for the team that just beat IPFW. I think that IUPUI game is going to be like a momentum starter for Robert Morris. It's going to help them out a little bit. I like it. So I'm on Robert Morris plus 5.5 in that one. And then the final game that I'm going to be on is going to be on I'm fading Charlotte. They're up from 7 to 7.5 now. So taking Tulsa plus 7.5, something in that range. KenPom, I think, has this line right at 7. This is about the spot, man, as well. Even though KenPom's number being basically right where the number is, that's fine. I think this is a bad spot for Charlotte, man. I know I did the same thing with Florida Gulf Coast after they had their huge upset of FAU, Florida Atlantic, the class of that conference there, the American, Florida Atlantic. And we know they dominated that conference last year, made it to the Final Four last year. So they have a target on their back. Florida Gulf Coast upset them in a game I was on as huge underdogs at home. And then Florida Gulf Coast did not suffer the letdown. We're still able to cover in the next game, but I'm still going back to the well here because Charlotte just did the same thing and beat Florida Atlantic, beat FAU on their own floor as not as significant underdogs, not 17.5, but still 8.5 point underdogs. As Charlotte, they were out to a gigantic lead in that game, and they showed up and they were blowing Florida Atlantic out of the water, basically just destroying them. And then Florida Atlantic came all the way back. I mean, they are a really good team. So they came all the way back, made it really close. And it was a close game for the last quarter of the game, pretty much. Came all the way down the stretch. And Charlotte still won the game, played real tough. They got punched in the mouth, basically, after they blew that huge lead. And sometimes teams will collapse like that, but they maintain that effort the whole time. Either way, just the fact that it's a continuous effort, like the whole game, to get that done in a huge game against a huge opponent, whether they lost or won that game, I look to go against them in the next game, but they won. I believe their crowd stormed the court there. That was kind of a historic upset for Charlotte, beating a ranked team on their own floor like that. Now they got Tulsa coming in. Tulsa hasn't really been playing that well. I wish Charlotte had a better game up next than UTSA, who's also not very good, but even so, they're in a letdown spot coming off that game against FAU. And I think Tulsa, they're in a bounce back spot. They're still looking for their first conference win. They just lost at East Carolina, but they were coming off a game where they played Memphis real tough and only lost by 3. So Tulsa put in a big effort against Memphis, who's one of the top teams in this conference, a ranked team, ranked ahead of FAU now, actually, because FAU's dropped 2 games now. Tulsa was in a bad spot there, and they went into East Carolina, and they still played pretty admirably, and they were winning that game for a lot of it. They were close to being able to win that game against East Carolina, but fell just short. But that tells me that Tulsa, they played well, even though they were in a bad spot. So that tells me this team, they they have some motivation. They have the ability to get up for these games, even when it might be like a game where some teams might just fall really flat. They did not put up a flat performance. They put up a decent performance. Does that mean this is going to be tough because it's a second straight road game? And maybe, but they're still trying to bounce back and still looking for their first conference win of the season. So they're still in a spot where I think they'll bounce back here. So I kind of like this for Tulsa. And I like the fact that they still showed up, even though it was a total hangover spot. And I wouldn't have blamed them if they fell totally flat in that game against East Carolina, but they didn't. They did fall short right at the end. But now I think Charlotte is in the really bad spot here. Tulsa's in a spot where they might be able to bounce back off of that loss. Charlotte just put in a max effort, and they're coming off one of the biggest wins in program history over FAU. So that's going to do it for me, man. After all that, the two plays that I have fallen on for today are Robert Morris plus 5.5 in college basketball and Tulsa plus 7.5 in college basketball. So enjoy the slate, enjoy the games today, man. That's going to do it for me. I'm Toad. Peace out.